Explained by the Billy Meier contacts, mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Marilyn Monroe murder. Death of Marilyn Monroe. Contact Report 625.
With regard to Marilyn Monroe, who allegedly committed suicide on the night from the 4th to the 5th of August 1962. Ever since the death of the woman, it has repeatedly been said that she did not commit suicide, but was murdered, which has, however, to this day by certain persons deliberately been portrayed as a conspiracy theory, because the effective truth is not supposed to be truth. In that regard, I wonder why this happened and still happens today. Because at that time, Ascot explained to me that the assertion about suicide was not true, for Marilyn Monroe did actually not kill herself, because in fact, in truth, she had been murdered, whereby the murderer was her longtime psychotherapist, whose name was Green or something like that. As Ascot also said, this fact was however concealed for political reasons, consequently this man was not brought to justice. But the actual reason for it, that is to say, the details behind the murder, which is today still portrayed as suicide, were unfortunately not commented on by Ascot. It is also to be said that on the last TV show in this matter, which I have seen, the presumption was also expressed that it might have been a murder after all, and that this very Green or similar name could have committed it. This rhymes with what Ascot explained to me already in 1962, and on what I want to ask you whether you too know something about it, maybe.
At that time, Ascot clarified everything in a good way, because it was an event of a kind that moved the human beings of the earth globally. She was able to clearly establish that Marilyn Monroe did not commit suicide, but was murdered, namely by her psychiatrist and therapist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, whose actual birth name was Romeo Greenspun. He put the women for years under strong medication by performing drug therapies with her and routinely administering her barbiturates and sedatives, which he obtained from an internist named Hyman Engelberg, who prescribed her many of the medications and which were, in reality, ordered by Greenson. These medications caused Marilyn Monroe to fall into a deep dependence on her medication, and Greenson, too, and to become increasingly miserable in terms of health and psyche. And namely, the more often she received and took the medications from Greenson, some of which were also forcibly entered into her. On the evening of 4th of August 1962, she was forced to take a larger dose of a strong sleep aid, namely pentobarbital, after which she became unconscious. And in fact, things happened in the way that Greenson, who was then summoned to Marilyn Monroe, after her reawakening, murdered her by an injection of the barbiturate chloral hydrate into the anus, as a result of which no injection wound could be found anywhere on the body. However, Greenson was not held accountable for the insidious murder, because his act was covered up, whereby he was protected by the Kennedy clan, that is to say, by John Fitzgerald and Robert Kennedy, on whose order he committed the murder. The reason for the murder was that Marilyn Monroe had a long, deep, and very intimate liaison with the two brothers John and Robert Kennedy, which she wanted to make known to the public as a result of hefty and serious disagreements with the Kennedy brothers. However, the two Kennedys wanted to and had to prevent this, so they made Greenson carrying out the murder. And that the two were eventually also murdered, namely John Fitzgerald on the 22nd November 1963 in Dallas, Texas, and Robert on the 6th of June 1968 in Los Angeles, California, led to a situation of ultimately them two could not be held accountable anymore. The same as Dr. Greenson, who died on 24th November 1979 in Los Angeles, whereby everything was shrugged off for the entire Kennedy clan, since from then on there was no longer any danger that Greenson could have been persuaded to confess if the truth had unexpectedly been found out and the whole thing had been made public.
Contact Report 672 20th century death of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe is said to have been killed by a U.S. Secret Service because she had an affair with John F. Kennedy. False Marilyn Monroe was murdered by the Monroe psychiatrist and therapist Dr. Ralph Greenson with an injection of chloral hydrate into the anus on the night from the 4th to the 5th of August, 1962 on behalf of the two brothers John Fitzgerald and Robert Kennedy. Which is why no puncture wound was found anywhere on the body.